Today I'm going to go over how I created this Drake for all the dogs animation using Blender, which Drake actually ended up seeing and sharing on his story. So for the 3D model of Drake, I used my go-to workflow of FaceGen with DAZ Studio. I love this workflow because it only requires 2 good quality images, and then the rest of the work is done by these amazing softwares. You can watch my character creation series to get a more detailed overview of this whole process. Now once I had my Drake model, I imported it into Blender and I started off by adding in some hair. Recently he's been wearing 2 different types of cornrows, one with 4 braids and one with only 2 braids. I decided to create both versions that I would use in different scenes. Now I completely underestimated how long this would actually take. It was a painful 4 hours trying to get the hair to look somewhat decent, but in the end I was super happy with how it turned out. I have a full video on hair creation as well in my character creation series. Now for the outfits, I created 2 different outfits for this animation. The first one was a futuristic Nike tracksuit with a glowing logo. This was inspired by the Nike vest he wore on his most recent tour. And the second outfit was inspired by the outfit he wore in his music video for 8 AM in Charlotte. And I also added some glowing hair clips as well, which I thought would be fitting with this outfit. I created both outfits using Marvelous Designer. It's my go-to workflow for creating clothing. I have a short tutorial on that as well that you can check out. Now lastly, I also changed the material on his eyes to a glowing red color to match the goat on the album cover. This small change really helped tie the whole concept together. Now for the first scene, I wanted to recreate Alex Choi's McLaren, which was using the music video for Another Late Night. Now for the 3D model of the car, I found a pretty close match on BlenderKit. The only issue was that the car didn't have a roof and it didn't have the same wheels. So I quickly modeled both of those to get the car to look as close to the original as possible. The part that took a while to figure out was how I was going to add in all the Christmas lights. I decided I would first model one single light and then duplicate it a couple times. Then I gave each one a different emissive color. I added an array modifier to be able to change the length of the lights. Then I also added a curve into the scene and added the curve modifier to the lights. Now by selecting the curve as the curve object, it allowed me to change the shape of the lights using the curve. Lastly, by increasing the depth value of the curve, I was able to give the curve some thickness. This would act as the wire that connected all the lights together. Then it was just a matter of placing the lights all over the car. This was a very time-consuming process because I had to manually place all the strands. But after an hour or so, I was finally done and the car looked amazing. Now for the camera, I had to parent it to the rig of the car. This way, when I keyframed the car to move forwards, the camera followed as well. From here, I added additional keyframes for the camera so it panned around the car and then into the front wheel. And with that, the first scene was done. The second scene was definitely the easiest one to create. I wanted to create a cool tunnel shot where the camera goes through the tunnel and into the character's eyes. So I searched for a tunnel in BlenderKit and I found this amazing futuristic looking tunnel that I imported into the scene. Now to animate the camera, I keyframed the camera on the first frame at the initial position. Then I went to the end frame and positioned the camera inside the eye. I decided to rotate the camera by 180 degrees at the end frame and add a keyframe for it. This gave me a nice rotating camera effect. But even with this, there was still something missing: camera shake. I used the camera shakeify add-on and then added 2 of the camera shake presets that I really like. This really made the whole shot feel a lot more dynamic. Lastly, I added some motion blur and set the value to 0.85 to make the movement feel a lot more dramatic. And with that, the second scene was done. For the third scene, I wanted to do a close-up shot that rotated around the character. First, I posed the character with his arms down. Now this part was pretty straightforward. The problem was that by just putting him in a static pose, the character didn't look alive. So to fix this, I had to add in some micro movements to different spine bones of the body and keyframe them across the timeline. Then I also added some subtle head movements as well to really give the animation a little more life. Now for the rest of the scene, it was actually a very simple setup. I used the cube as the background for the scene. And then I added a single area light, which I placed right above the character. And I increased the strength of the light to 50 watts. I wanted the hair clips to be the main focal point of the scene, so I made sure the background was fairly dark. Now to get smooth camera movements, I added an empty object into the scene and placed it on the character. And then I added a track 2 constraint on the camera and selected the empty object as the constraint object. Now as I moved the camera, it stayed locked onto the character. This is one of my favorite camera movement techniques because it allows me to create very clean movements with very little effort. I keyframed the camera at different points around the character until I got something that looked like this. Now lastly, I added another empty object into the scene to use as the depth of field value for the camera. The depth of field value essentially determines what point to focus on while blurring out the rest of the scene. In this case, I keyframed the depth of field empty object to focus on different hair clips as the camera panned around the character. And with that, the third scene was finally done. Now for the last and final scene, I wanted to create a scene where Drake is looking at the album cover his son made. But to stick to the futuristic theme of the animation, I decided to create small cube TVs in the shape of the album cover. Now I didn't want to leave the screens blank, so I decided to show something relevant to the album. I decided to create a poster for Bark Radio, which is an ongoing theme around the album and is referenced on a couple of tracks as well. Then in Blender, using the UV editor, I placed different parts of the poster on different screens until I was happy with the final result. Now I wanted the screen to be off at first and then turn on after a couple of seconds. So I keyframed the emission value and staggered the timing so some screens turn on first and then others after. And the setup for the rest of the scene was pretty straightforward as well. I set up a couple of area lights in the scene and then keyframed the camera to pan down. And with that, the last scene was finally done. Next, I opened up After Effects for some post-processing. In a new composition, I added all the scenes. For the car scene, the tunnel scene, and the close-up scene, I added a glow effect to really make the colors look more vibrant. For the tunnel shot, I also added a CC lens effect to distort the edges. I would highly recommend checking out the final version of this animation on my Instagram, which has the added music and sound effects. And that is it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Finally, like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.